Hello and welcome to the Osint podcast. I am Osinttechnical. Kyle Glenn is also here. John from Defense Geek, and this week we have David from Aurora Intel here to talk about, well, a lot of stuff. And I have been specifically told by John to hold off on talking about Russia until we get some other stuff in here. So I'll let him start off.
Yeah, so this week we are joined by David from Aurora Intel. I think it's fair to say that when I started out in the open source intelligence Twitter space, I think Aurora Intel was one of the first accounts that I followed. So it's been over 3 years now. I've been following you, David, and just wanted you to sort of start us off this evening and just tell us a little bit about yourself and about the account.
Well, first of all, cheers for having me. It's great to be here. It's a great community to be part of on Twitter, and speaking and meeting folk like yourself makes it that little bit extra worthwhile. So yeah, when did we start? 2018. Adam and I were sitting on a Discord server, and he said he was going to start up a Twitter account, and then I said, "Do you want a hand with it?" And kind of went from there. We sort of started off small, focusing on predominantly around Israel and Gaza, and then from there we've kind of gone into more of the wider Middle East. And one of the things that we homed in on especially was the use of satellite imagery and how that can help, I guess, give the full picture of an event, not just what they say on the ground. As we all know, sometimes what they see on the ground doesn't match the stories that they're telling. And since there, we've kind of just gone, I guess, from strength to strength, really, in regards to getting the info out to the public in that respect.
Yeah, and that's always been a super big thing that I noticed that you guys have done is that really hard focus on satellite imagery and sort of interacting with a situation and interacting with a conflict in a way that sort of is, I guess, this omniscient sort of presence in the sky of being able to analyze things sort of not exactly as they happen with news reports, but slightly after, but in a super deep and varied manner, just utilizing that satellite imagery. Um, I know, there aren't as many accounts that focus on that type of sort of analysis, and specifically that type of satellite analysis that you guys are able to put together. That usually isn't a larger news organization.
Yeah, and I think it's built up over time, and I think the the key thing is when it's breaking news, it's you're trying to be reactive, and sometimes reacting to breaking news sometimes gives the wrong message in the sense of things can get lost in translation. People don't quite understand what's fully going on the ground and these kind of things. But also that stepping back, or when you look at what actually happened from a satellite imagery point of view, it gives you a picture of the before, and then also the before in the sense of you're looking at data across months, years, and fully understanding the full picture, and that sometimes gives you more than just what's happening right now on the ground. And we've got what I think it's now just over 3 years. We're building constantly behind the scenes our understanding. And if we look at, like, for example, the Syria recently with the reported airstrike against the ports, you're looking at the understandings of we're in this, so as we call it, the war between wars, in the sense of Israel and Iran. And you look at from the east, you have it coming in through the border from Iraq into Syria. You've got and that's on the roads, and then you've obviously got the planes that we always talk about, the IRGC related planes that come in through the air. And then obviously now we're looking at from the west in that sense, in regards to the shipments on the vessels. And it's all these looking at the wider picture, so it's not just related to the single event, but just what's going on across the wider span. And satellite imagery, and also not just satellite imagery, but we talk about flight tracking and marine traffic, and for the vessels, all these kind of things play a bigger part to understanding that bigger picture.
Yeah, and if someone, say, wanted to get into sort of analyzing satellite imagery, where do you suggest that they would start?
Honestly, like I there's the place that I started on was Sentinel Hub. You know, Sentinel Hub is great. It's got the access to the European Space Agency sort of free data and open data, and actually there's even now commercial data in there as well through Airbus if you're willing to pay for it. But Sentinel Hub's a great place just to play and learn and understand. And looking at that community, if you have a look at the Sentinel Hub's Twitter account, you can often see them retweeting and commenting and interacting with users. And I think that's a great place to just start because it shows you what the possibilities are, not just from a understanding true color, but to near infrared, to understanding how vegetation and changes which can be shown by fire or our example airstrikes are another one, and really that's the first place to go. Also, they've got scripts available to show you how they can manipulate the data on the different bands on the satellite imagery. It really is a great resource. And also they've got a YouTube channel as well where they teach you how to do, I guess, in quotations, basic analysis, and from there you can really learn quite a lot.
Yeah, I've typically used Sentinel Hub, at least in the past, for, I mean, mostly boat hunting because that's what at least I'm good at. I rely on the work of others, especially you, for stuff that's more land based. Um, but yeah, it's definitely, I would also say that's a absolutely great place to start. They have super easy features to sort of sort stuff by date, by, a general time period of when you want to look at. I know a lot of other sites are incredibly hard sort of to navigate. I know the Copernicus site is very difficult, especially when it comes to sourcing a lot of open source stuff. And then, I mean, the US, we have Earth Explorer, which is just horrifying to try to actually get together. It's a lot of these platforms are made for much more data oriented analytics and much more of a sort of again, a data based sort of interpretation of the imagery. So it's a lot less towards just looking at the images themselves, and that can definitely cause some pain. But Sentinel Hub is very much easy to access.
Yeah, and I think these ones that you've used as an example there, they've got a derived use case. If we take like firms as an example for the fire detection, they've got a derived use case, so they're making an interface for that single requirement. As with Sentinel, now it's expanding at rapid paces with new data coming in that's looking at the wider scope. And recently, they've just brought the Planet Labs data in regards to looking at the forestry data. So they're evolving, and as and when those new things come on, they give you something new to learn and I guess in quotations play with. That's what that's how you start, right? You start off with understanding these things, you play and understand and look at how to interpret these things, and then you move forward into the analytical piece.
Yeah, that's the important thing to remember is that it's a, just the longer that you play with it, the more that you'll figure out what to do. That's a big thing. Is experience trumps pretty much everything else when it comes to looking at satellite imagery. When it comes to interpreting satellite imagery, the best thing to do is just have experience and to utilize that experience as best as possible.
Yeah, and one great one is to look back at what other people have found previously over the last few years. We can take that in any example. We can look at the guys who focus on North Korea as an example when we're looking at their missile launches or their new buildings or infrastructure. You can look back at what they've done and how they've interpreted it and see what indicators and keys they're looking for. Again, airstrikes in Syria or Iraq. Again, look back at past analysis again, so you can review it. And that's really how I learned these things, is to look and understand. There's experts out there. Who do this as their job 24/7, and you can learn a lot from other people, and the key thing is to be respectful of that. Is as you do learn going forward, that you remember that you're not alone in that respect. As there are other people out there, so you can also ask them for help because it is really a team effort in that regards.
Yeah. And again, the understanding that other people might know more than you is certainly a skill that a lot of people lack. But once you sort of, but once you sort of get that understanding, it's a lot easier to, process new information and sort of embrace things. And, being able to admit you're wrong is a super important thing that I'll say, I've had issues with that in the past. I think everyone has. And
100%.
yeah.
It's different. We all have make mistakes. We're all human, right? Nobody's ever 100% right all the time. And I've done analysis before, posted something and then gone, no, hold on a second, that's not correct, and had to retract it. And I'll apologize for that. And it's the an example of one that is always easy is when there's clouds involved, and we're all talking about clouds, and I'm sure clouds are going to become a topic shortly when we get onto Russia and Ukraine, which again is not an area I know about. So ultimately, I can pitch in to a certain extent, but I'm not going to pretend I know about it because I'll probably be wrong. And it's understanding and learning and knowing about your field and area that you've built up over time. But clouds, as an example, always create ambiguity, and that can sometimes lead to wrong interpretation, and that's why quite often you'll sometimes see me saying, look, I'm going to wait for a couple of days until I fully understand. And I speak to, for example, Kyle quite regularly, mostly on a daily basis, as an example. And when I'm looking at things to do with events in the Middle East, we'll always be pinging backwards and forwards, and quite often I will say clouds are a problem, and
Well,
it's just one of these things.
it's the one nice thing about working with the Middle East is that clouds may be a problem, but they're at least a bit less frequent.
Tell you what, seeing winter though, honestly, winter's bad. I think it's snowing if I remember correctly in Syria today. So that's another thing that
Yeah.
it's but no, it's definitely a lot less than for you guys keeping a focus on Ukraine and Russia. That's for sure.
No, it is always really painful when you get like new imagery of somewhere in Europe you're trying to look at, and then it comes up with like that little symbol of like the cloud symbol and 100% next to it, and you're like, oh god damn it! Like you've waited a week for like the next imagery, and then it's just completely cloud covered, and it's always really frustrating.
Yeah, I've been trying to look at air travel or air traffic, especially RAFC 17 traffic at Kiev's main airport, and yeah, no, it's been 100% cloud covered for the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 passes now. So it's pretty hard to actually interpret that imagery when there's nothing to see but the tops of some clouds.
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually when you look at it in the further depths. Now that we're slowly sliding into your area on the Russia Ukraine, which is eking in slowly. But in that respect, there was, I don't know the exact quote, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's always this thing about you don't go to war in quotations in winter because of the weather there, right? And I don't know the exact wording around that, but right now a lot of the stuff's hidden, right? Because of the clouds. As with over the summertime, the weather's maybe better, so things are easier to track from satellite imagery. So actually, in quotations, from a secrecy point of view, despite TikTok, because I've noticed that TikTok has nearly every single Russia-Ukraine video possible at the moment, you see less from the sky because of those clouds. So it's, we talk about OPSEC and secrecy, but actually that the clouds are currently helping them in that regard.
What I always find quite funny in regards to satellite imagery, and I think it might be something you posted recently when it was about the recent Saudi airstrikes in Yemen, when they were expected to target the stadium, the football stadium or the sports stadium,
Yeah,
whatever it was, and
yeah,
they didn't.
yeah.
And then people were insisting that they did, and they destroyed it. And then you were posting like satellite imagery from 12 hours previous, and you were like, nope, it's still there, it's still completely intact. And they were like, nope, satellite imagery's wrong, it's photoshopped, it's whatever, it's this, and it's just like, well, look at it yourself, it's free, you can check it.
Yeah, I've had one or two. Yeah, to be honest with you, I haven't had that many accusations of photoshopping in that regards. Of course, things are enhanced on the imagery to make things appear better when you modify the bands to remove like glare and so on and so forth. But actually modifying, as in the real as we call it, photoshopping an image. I haven't had that many accusations, and I think that's because people who do follow these kind of accounts in the Osint area realize that Sentinel and these things are free. I think it's honestly sometimes when it doesn't quite fit that person's narrative or agenda or whatever terminology you want to use, that's when they accuse you of modifying it. But I've not, to be fair, I've seen it on other people's feeds more than ours, I have to say.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure you are, in terms of follower numbers, you are the largest Osint account out there. But certainly in our particular group that we're a part of.
Well,
Hang on.
I would have technically said Conflicts was, but they're on 0 at the moment. So it's
Sorry, Kyle.
controversial there. Controversial
I mean,
today.
I found suspect number 1 right now who took us down. Obviously, who benefits?
Yeah. So I think I've made this comment multiple times on the feed or to people in general. The following really wasn't why we started this, right? I still feel humbled at the fact that we have over 100, like just 100, not the 100,000, but just 100 followers that actually come to us for information. And that kind of drives me more to make sure that I get the details correct. We used to do more around the speculation kind of stuff, and we still do in that regards when we're asked our opinions, but because of that we've kind of adapted to make sure that we get the information correct and right with the analysis and our analysis. Now obviously, again, we'll go back to the satellite imagery thing. If that analysis doesn't always agree with someone's agenda or views, of course they're always going to argue with it, but we work on that historical data and that understanding of what we've seen in the past to make our analysis. And it's the figures are arbitrary, right? I would do that now, as we've learned and grown and understood stuff more, that that doesn't really matter in that regard. It's about making sure that the content we're putting out is as accurate as possible.
Yeah, and accuracy of content is a super important thing that I think all of us have dealt with in the past. I know UK Defence Journal's retraction and correction page is fairly long. There's a lot in there, but again, as I think George said during the last podcast, people react to retractions and corrections when you do them quickly and you do them honestly in a positive manner.
People appreciate it,
Yeah.
be honest, right? I think George, that he put up a tweet, was it last week, this week, just going, oh yeah, sorry, no, it was this week, wasn't it, in regards to the whole Germany thing and flight pass and so on and so forth. And all he retracted it and said, look, it is what it is, I made a mistake, I'm sorry. And I would say 95% of the people who were responding to him on Twitter and that were like, yeah, cool, we appreciate you being honest, thank you, and then moved on. There's always unfortunately going to be those people who see it differently, but that's just the way some people are, unfortunately, in that respect.
Yeah, and I mean, 99% of people react positively to what we do. Probably even more than that, 99.9%. And it's important to remember that the ones who don't are all Russian trolls and you shouldn't believe them, darn it. No, but it's, there of course always will be people who react negatively to what you do. Frequently, when people react negatively, they have a reason, and it's usually a good reason. And it's important to take those people into mind, but at the same time, those are the people.
We'll look at Kyle's situation today with the Conflicts account, right? The backing that he's had from the community about what why, and at the moment we don't have an answer why it's been suspended, but the community is there, and there's been some quite I mean, we all joke and laugh about verified accounts, right? But verified accounts have been backing, and these are people from local media, like mainstream media, who have been getting on the back of it, like Sky News and BBC, etc. So there is that information for it. Yeah, it's always it's always nice when you finally get some high resolution imagery of an area that you've been having a gander at, and you're unsure of something. I mean, some of them are really obvious, like when it's a big black mark, because it's just the building's just gone. But obviously there's the more acute ones when it's the roof's just been taken off, and that comes down to this. It's interesting when you analyze them more, not just from the imagery perspective, but also the actions around the potential airstrike. Is we've seen airstrikes where the roof has been taken off, but the building's still intact. And that's by design. It's by the bomb damage assessment that's been done by the people conducting the airstrike. They know what munition to use, be it a GBU-39 or something larger. And it's always interesting when you look at that, because you start to think about how much preparation has gone into these things. If they're just taking a roof off as an example, if we look back at like the Gaza-Israel conflict last year, there was some drone strikes that were done where they were purely just taking out the wall of the of the apartment block or flat block or whatever you want to call it, and then obviously we saw ones where more controversial ones where they took down full buildings, and it's each one has been assessed slightly different, and you look at these details a little bit more when you're looking at the imagery, because it's sometimes you question why they're done in a certain way. And of course we don't have the intel, right? We don't know why certain decisions are made. We're not affiliated to anybody in that respect, so it's just more questions to ask yourself when you're looking at these things, and again, question about what you're looking at.
Yeah, and that is one of the big things is self-questioning, all the time, verifying what you're putting out, and checking to see if you've messed up. I guess that is an important thing to do. But yeah, again, assessment is always difficult. It's tracking ships is a bit easier because they're big, but there's a lot of stuff, especially when they're in port. Things get jumbled, and it's always important to have maybe a second set of eyes or someone else to sanity check you.
Yeah, and there's loads of accounts out there that do it. If we talk about ships and vessels, for example, the key one that I've obviously been paying attention to in recent years is tankers, and you got tanker trackers who put out phenomenal data and phenomenal information around that area. And if we're talking about geolocation, we all know who Samir is, right? Well, the account Samir on Twitter, and it's like, if you want something located, it's like give him half an hour and he's found it. It doesn't matter where it is in the world. It's just like, and it's always good to cross-reference against these other people who have that knowledge. The community is, the Osint community, as we talk about, isn't singular. You're not alone. There are people who are there who have skills and understandings that you may not have, and it's important that you recognize that and work and take, understand and interpret it from other people, and that makes it better. That makes the information more whole in that regards.
No, this is what I say all the time. Like OSINT in general is collaborative. No one knows everything. And people specialized in like Samir, like in geolocation, and people like yourselves, do satellite imagery. People, like weapons identification, like tank identification, aircraft tracking, aircraft spotting, all these kind of things. Like no one does everything. Well, no one does everything, and no one shall we say? Like a lot of people do lots of different things. I dabble in a lot of different things, but you can't do everything well. You kind of have to specialize a certain thing, and that's why if you have to have a kind of almost like a little telephone book of people who you can kind of go to on short notice for if you need like insight on a specific thing, which is really useful to have.
Definitely, no, I agree with that for sure. There's a lot of people in that community, and it's about utilizing skills correctly in that regard.
Yeah.
I certainly.
It's fair to say that, as you mentioned earlier, your sort of area of specialty, in particular, sort of geographically speaking, is Israel and the Middle East. And I was just wondering if you could sort of give us an update on the ongoing situation between Israel and Iran, because I think it's fair to say that with everything that's been going on in Ukraine in the last few weeks, which we'll get to shortly, it's kind of slipped out of focus, the sort of the ongoing tensions between those two countries over Iran's nuclear program.
So conversations are still going on in Vienna, right? And depending on your, I don't know the demographic of everybody that listens to this, but depending on your personal opinion, you'll either say they're going well or they're not, right? And it depends on what you read at face value. Those discussions are still trickling on in the background. I personal opinion, I don't see us I don't see us seeing a deal that is in quotations the same or similar to the original JCPOA, but you just don't know, right? You don't know what's going on, and quite often I sometimes wonder, especially when it comes uh, to conversations around this, or things put out in the media to try stir a story or to try push a narrative or a decision, in that regards, and is the media being used to help influence something? So that piece is ongoing, and that, we keep saying we're going to hear, it was back in November, it'll be this, and December it'll be that, and yada yada yada, but that's still happening. We've obviously had the exercise earlier on in the year, the Iranian IRGC exercise, which showed as I call it, the fake Demona or the mock Demona getting ultimately obliterated by the ballistic missiles, in that regards, and that was a propaganda piece, as we come to love, in that regards. We see them every time that they do an exercise, and the propaganda gives you an insight, right? Without those pieces of propaganda, you wouldn't be able to see what's going on, in quotations. But then we have the flip side, where we also see propaganda coming out of Israel, and it's always, it always talks about preparing to strike Iran and all these kind of things, and there's always a tit for tat scenario with those two countries when it comes to these propaganda stuff, and then again, depending on people's opinions, you'll either say, yep, Israel will be able to do it, and then vice versa, they'll say Israel won't have a hope in hell, and it's, you always see all this out. So you've got that ongoing, and that's going to continue for until there's a catalyst. And the always question is going to be, what is that catalyst? Is the catalyst going to be in Syria, or is the catalyst going to be in Iraq? Could the catalyst even be in Yemen? Or there's all these kind of pieces at play. We've not had a sounds a bit weird, but we've not had an airstrike for several weeks now. So that's a long time currently for there not to have been an airstrike related to supposedly Israel, because of course Israel always go rather ambiguous when it comes to this. But it's been a while since we've had an airstrike in Syria, and you hear tidbits around, is that because there's threats and rumors that Iran are now getting to the point of retaliation to these airstrikes? And we kind of saw that in the latter part of last year, where we saw an airstrike in the Palmyra region of Syria against affiliated IRGC sites. And we know they're affiliated because of the media that got released around them, but also the further follow-up to that, which was the drone attack against the Al-Tanf garrison on the Iraq-Syria border. So, things are always ticking over, and we hear about the war between wars, and this is an ongoing thing. And then, earlier on this week, we had the drone attack against the UAE. From the Houthis in Yemen, and again, is that another piece to consider? Because we know the Iranian drones are proliferant, and we know they're accurate, and there's a naivety out there, I think, that some people need to accept, is these things are deadly, these things are lethal, and we know they are. So don't pretend they're not. Quite often some of the comments are saying, "Oh, it's all CGI," or "It's all it's all faked." But we've seen evidence of these drones, and we know they can do what they can do. So we saw UAE earlier on this week, it's targeting the oil depot in that respect. We obviously heard the news yesterday. There was mumbles of it earlier on in the week, but it got, I guess in quotations, leaked or announced or reported on yesterday about THAAD having its first operational usage, and it intercepted the medium-range ballistic missiles launched, and then, but that also plays part for the whole Israel-Iran piece, because we know Israel are obviously tied in with the US in that respect. You know, they're allies. THAAD again was tested in Israel in respect into integrating into the Israeli radar network in 2019. Some people still believe it's still deployed there as a precautionary measure. Others say it got removed. Again, depending on what media source or influence you want to believe, you'll either believe one or the other. So they'll obviously have a key interest in how on how that reacts. And then all these little things that are going on in the background all have a sort of an influence on how things will change. And we'll go back to the example for the whole Israel going to strike Iran piece, and you could talk for a long time about that, again, depending on your political prowess or depend on what your view is on it. But we talk about how, suppose it strikes in Syria. If Israel were to lose one jet against Syrian air defense, like they did in 2018, as an example, that would have an impact on their planning for Iran, because that's one less jet that they've got to consider, one less offensive tool to consider, and all these things play a part. So decisions aren't made on a whim. It's always a risk mitigation, and it's a risk versus reward scenario in these things, and every little decision has a potential impact. And these things aren't going to happen overnight, and the Iran-Israel thing isn't going to be, as a thing, is the Iran-Israel conflict or war between wars, or however you want to put it, isn't going to just change on a whim. It's going to happen over a matter of time. And there's always pieces to be looking for. Apologies, I feel like I rambled there a wee bit. Kind of slight lecture in that regard.
No, that's good. That's good. Brilliant. I think at this point we've kept technical on the leash for long enough, so I suppose we'd better move on to the sort of the ongoing topic of interest for the vast majority of our listeners, which is obviously Ukraine and Russia. So, technical, over to you.
When was our last episode? Just so we can have an idea of what's happened.
3 weeks ago now, to be fair.
So, was it New Year's Day? Was it New Year's Day?
Yes, it was. I distinctly remember it because certain
certain
members of us were not entirely sober for that podcast, especially the fact that I was just a few hours behind you guys on that.
I guess I'm trying to think of what the major changes has been in the last 3 weeks. I guess the big one will be the movement of the Eastern Military District, right? I guess that's the big change over the last few weeks, at least.
I mean, I could just list what I have written down.
Go ahead.
S-400s in Belarus. This is moving back from most recent to oldest, I believe. But fighter jets from the Eastern Military District being deployed into Belarus. Additional traffic, including a lot of artillery systems moving into Belarus, especially just north of Kiev. Iskanders, a lot of them. Including extra missiles and a number of launchers appearing in Western Russia near Ukraine. There was a train of Buck M1s, I believe, as well. There were a number of them with associated support equipment.
Which is probably not something we were really expecting to see back near Ukraine after the last incident involving those particular missiles a few years ago.
Yeah, but I would not like to be a commercial pilot in Ukrainian airspace anytime in the near future. So there's that as well. What else? Additional movement of Western Military District units. So I believe it was, I'm forgetting which, there was a Guards tank army that was moving, and I'm forgetting which one it was that was moving a number of units in, including T-80s. There was a fairly frontline unit, the 4th Guards Tank Division, which is a frontline unit and definitely would be a sort of a spearhead if Russia were to move down towards Kiev. And they were, let me just double check where they were. It was Nara Station in in Kaluga. So that was south of Moscow. So it looked like they were moving out of their holding areas because they're based right south of Moscow as well. What else? Honestly, the list is a mile long of things that I was looking at. And the Russians have sortied a very large portion of their navy.
Yeah.
That was a significantly major event that just happened, and it seems to be at the moment, from at least what I can see, though I have not been able to double check satellite imagery just due to a combination of clouds and there hasn't been enough time to get correct satellite passes over the appropriate naval bases I want to take a look at. But I should get some good passes, I think, tomorrow. Sentinel does Severomorsk. So we should be able to see whether or not we actually have a number of ships that have sort of slipped their moorings and moved out to sea. I really want to see the number of subs that have left. That's going to be a big one. And I know Sentinel, at least open source Sentinel imagery, is sort of iffy on how well it can detect submarines just because of their size and the way they ride in the water. But I should be at least able to see a bit or general movement. And all the Russian amphibious landing ships that left the Baltic. I think that's the last big one that then transited the English Channel and are now heading towards the Black Sea in Ukraine.
Yeah, and if going back to the movement into Belarus, I mean, obviously Russia and Belarus both say they have exercises planned from the 10th, I believe, to the 20th of February. And those exercises are mostly focused in the west, I believe, west of Belarus, near the Polish border, and also the Ukrainian border. So they kind of west and northwest and southwest and Belarusian borders. But what's interesting about a lot of the equipment that's moved into Belarus and where it's been spotted is it's nowhere near where they said the exercises are going to happen. So obviously they said the exercises are happening in the west. A lot of what looks like temporary vehicle stores and vehicle camps are being set up in the east, like on the Russian border. Which, without looking at a map, I couldn't tell you how many kilometers that is away from where they said they're going to be exercising. But it's a long way, and it makes absolutely no sense for them to say move. Because a lot of them have come from. I mean, a lot of these vehicles have come from. I mean, no exaggeration, like near enough the North Korean border in the east of Russia. So they've traveled, 4,000-5,000 kilometers to Belarus, and then been unloaded, which would make no sense to unload them later if the final destination was, the west. So the fact that they're being unloaded in the east makes it seem like that is their final destination, at least for the time being, which, as I said, is nowhere near any planned exercise sites at the moment. So obviously there are a lot of vehicles and equipment popping up where the exercises are happening. I'm sure there are actual exercises planned. I don't think that's, a lie as such. The far more concerning thing is the amount of troops and equipment that's turning up where it shouldn't be, should we say, like where it's not expected to be.
Yeah, and I think it's something that we've focused on in the past that I think was present during the last build-up in the spring of last year. But that was sort of smaller. It's really expensive to do what they're doing right now. It is not a cheap endeavor, especially once they start moving, or they have started moving aircraft and other fairly difficult things to move, like again, the Iskanders and a lot of the larger stuff they're moving. Again, it isn't a cheap endeavor for them. I think Putin expects a return on his investment here. I wouldn't give Putin credit for being a stupid individual. He as much as he's objectively an evil person, and I don't think that take will ever sour. He's not stupid. I expect that he's looking to get something out of this, and whether it not be that, breaking NATO or causing issues within NATO, I think he's, gotten that done pretty well. Um, obviously there's currently a schism on supplying support for Ukraine, with Germany anchoring one side of it, and a fairly large portion of NATO on the other side willing to supply Ukraine with various arms and defensive measures. But I mean, at this point, I think, at least with the whole German issue, he's gotten some of what he's want. He has driven a fairly significant wedge into NATO.
Mhm.
And, there are two things. He could take that as a win, or he could, push the advantage he already has and make that wedge larger, and potentially, cause even deeper schisms between Germany and the rest of NATO.
Yeah, and I think that is it's something we discussed a good few episodes ago. Would be the kind of split in NATO, wouldn't it? And I believe we discussed it in regards to fuel prices at the time, which obviously it's not quite come to that. I mean, obviously the Nord Stream 2 is a big part of why not Russia, why Germany is hesitant, shall we say, to be too aggressive against Russia at the moment. But yeah, and I think, like, as we said, a couple of episodes ago, the countries which are being I don't want to say aggressive, because it's not aggression, but being more like
Supportive of
resistant, I
Ukraine.
guess, or yeah, they're kind of not backing down from Russia's aggression, so we say, are the Baltic states, and Poland, and of course then we've got like the UK and the US who are supplying weapons. But yeah, it's the countries who are on the Russian border, as expected, are the ones that are far more concerned over Russia's actions at the moment, as obviously they're the ones who are, they'll say, any war in Ukraine will directly or indirectly affect the Baltic states, and it'll affect Poland, because as the Ukrainian president said yesterday, there'll be a huge refugee crisis if Russia invade. Like hundreds of, Ukraine is a very, very large country. I'm not sure what the population is. I'm just going to quickly Google it. 44 million, should we say. It's a country of 44 million people. And, a conventional war between Russia and Ukraine will be absolutely devastating. Like, entire cities, entire towns will be, raised. They'll be, unlivable for a lot of people. So, we could theoretically see, in the event of a war, like millions of refugees trying to flee the country, or at least being internally displaced. And that will have a massive, massive issue on the Baltic states and like Eastern Europe in general. And again, fully expect Russia to take advantage of that, as they did, they do like the current refugee situations from the Middle East. Russia absolutely benefits from the chaos that they cause in Syria. So it's definitely, you can see why. The Baltic states in general are very keen to provide lethal aid to Ukraine, where countries like Germany are less less keen, shall we say?
Yeah, and that is certainly an element. I mean, if you look at the actual supplies the Baltic states are sending, though, I mean, it's it's for them it's not minor, but it's still, in the grand scheme of things, the aid's pretty minor. The UK has sent a number of shoot, that's the one other thing I missed. The UK sending a bunch of weapon systems. There's honestly been a lot over the past few weeks. But that was certainly a large amount of aid. And again, with that aid, it's more aimed at not allowing Ukraine to decisively repel a Russian invasion, but make it a lot more costly, by supplying them with, fairly advanced weapon systems. They're able to exact a higher toll on any sort of Russian action, especially, damaging and destroying Russian equipment would certainly cause them a lot of issues, especially just with the amount that they're potentially going to be sort of throwing into Ukraine.
Yeah, and I think that's Ukraine's best hope is, I mean, I don't think anyone here believes, or I don't think anyone really believes that in the event of a full Russian invasion, that Ukraine will be able to repel it, so to speak. It is, like I said, it's going to be a case of trying to do as much damage to Russia as possible, as quickly as possible, to make it unfeasible for them to, continue their offensive. Um,
And it's fair to say
and
that the weapons that Britain is supplying are mainly to create effectively a delaying action to allow Ukraine to drag it out, so that NATO can then look at the options it's faced with at that point and decide whether or not it wants to act. I mean, I think it's fair to say most of the weapons that the RAF has flown in the last few days have been anti-armour or anti-tank weapons. And ultimately, the Russians, we've seen quite a lot of armoured vehicles being moved on trains across Russia over the last month and a half. As you mentioned earlier, TikTok has been just an incredible source of video footage of these massive train loads of military gear being moved towards Ukraine. And I suspect
It's been wild for this stuff. Like again, Russian Ukraine's not again my area, but like every video that I see going around is TikTok related. I mean,
mental.
yeah, we all talk about using things like Instagram and Snapchat and all these, but TikTok and in this, in quotation, and it's not a conflict, right? But it's looking at the bigger picture. It's just been non-stop videos from that application, which I don't know whether I'm surprised by or not. In that
The
regards,
Russians are forcing me to use TikTok, and I don't like it.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not a TikTok user because again, the areas that I focus at are mostly, oddly enough, it's Snapchat and Instagram and actually Twitter. To be fair, a lot of stuff's always on those, or Telegram as well. But yeah, TikTok seems to have come into a league of its own in this area.
Seriously,
no.
please go back to using Snapchat because the built-in GIS functions and attached data for location was great. And now I don't have that anymore, and it's getting sort of depressing.
Yeah, most of my day now is just Google translating "where is this" into Russian and posting it on TikTok videos because that's what my day consists of, and hoping that random TikTok users, tell me where they filmed this video. Um, But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense why TikTok is the kind of lead in social media for, these videos. Is because, I mean, primarily it's a video sharing social media, which there aren't a lot of. I mean, other than Snapchat, there aren't many which specifically, the only thing you can do is post videos and comment on them. I guess it's like a little mini YouTube, so to speak. That's the only thing you can really compare it with. And, people. I mean, again, like every single one of us, if we were out on a walk and a train went past with a ton of military equipment on it, I know for a fact I'd film it, and I'm sure most people would as well. They think, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's not something I see very often. You'd film it, you'd share it with your friends, and at the moment, what people are using is TikTok. So you could post it on TikTok, and you'll caption it. I don't know. Like, I'm trying to think what the most common captions I search up, but it's normally just military equipment or like the English word is echelon, which I guess is a convoy. Like is a similar word. It's kind of like a similar word as convoy. And another common one is they all seem to use the same two songs or two or three songs, which are by different singers, different bands, but the song is always like some variation on war or warfare or something like that. So just searching those songs, you find videos of. I find Ukrainian soldiers showing off their military ID, which seems like a terrible idea. But they're filming themselves in training and filming their military ID and filming their weapons and stuff. So it's kids, isn't it? A lot of the time, like 18 to 20-year-old kids who are being conscripted into the military and they're having fun and they're posting on TikTok. And we know from Russia in 2014 and 2015. I believe there was a great Vice documentary. I believe it was called. Selfie soldiers or something like that, in which they pretty much tracked like a few Russian soldiers from their barracks into Ukraine to being killed in Ukraine simply by the selfies they were posting on social media. Um, so obviously the Russian OPSEC at the time wasn't fantastic. And obviously,
But
most of
this
the videos coming
time
out.
it seems to be much better.
Yeah.
'Cause
Well,
good lord, I have seen nothing coming from Russian service members like at all.
no, and if they are, they're normally reservists, from what I've seen. Anyone that kind of talking about going to training or being called up or anything like that, 99% of the time I've seen it, it's been reservists who probably don't have the same level of um, OPSEC awareness, shall we say.
And who was it? The CIT team who was contacting families of military service members, and they were revealing a lot more than we were seeing the actual service members themselves revealing. Especially, they were talking about. Let me just see if I can find the exact tweet there. Yeah, being sent away potentially for multiple months, on quote unquote business. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah,
which
was there not one about 6 months or something that I think I saw going
six
around?
6 to 9
6 to
months
9
or
months,
something.
yeah. Or I
Yeah,
think it
Yeah.
was
there was,
either 6 to 9 or 3 to 9. Um, yeah, but that certainly tells you about what they were
Yeah, because I
expecting.
saw one. I don't know if it was a CIT team or if it was another. I think it was a journalist who again was kind of reaching out to like family members, and I think one was. I think again, it's all hearsay, should we say? I guess. But they were like, "Oh no, it's not exercises. My husband's going to Ukraine." Um, they just openly said that. And again, it's pretty damning if you look at it on its own. But again, it's
yeah.
it's not
It's an
confirmed,
it's
because there's no war. Well, there is war obviously in the east, but Russia haven't. No, Russia have invaded. I'm trying to. They haven't invaded again. They haven't invaded again since 2014, 2015 yet. But it looks like if you take everything that's happening, it looks like it's going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that one. I think it's again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it was a wife or girlfriend or whatever making that comment that they're going to Ukraine. Again, it's this interpretation and understanding thing, isn't it? In regards
Hmm.
to, is that her just saying because she believes that or she wants that because that's what their expectation is, or they have they actually been told that? And again,
Yeah,
this it comes back to where we talk about interpretation and understanding and things that get lost in translation. That's a prime example of where something can get lost because it's just her. It's an interesting one, and it's that whole thing around how people talk and how people make comments and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and
yeah,
the
it has.
million. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say it's got real parallels to the last time when Russia moved into Ukraine again in 1415. I was reading an article by it was Russian media. It wasn't like state media. It was like, I guess, quote unquote free media in Russia, who were in eastern Ukraine visiting hospitals at the time when like the war was in full swing, and they were talking to um, Russian soldiers, or who would claim to be Russian soldiers. And this article was saying, like, they spoke to these soldiers and they were told, and these soldiers were quite forthcoming again with information, like wives and girlfriends have been this time. And they were like, "Oh yeah, I'm from this unit. I'm from this city. We were told we were going on exercises, and then we got to the border, and we were told to cross into Ukraine." So it's a lot. They were very open about, well, individual soldiers were, should we say, were very open about their orders back in 1415. So the fact that maybe um, like wives and girlfriends do know now, like, a lot of people, you talk to your partner, don't you? A lot of the time, if you get told you're going to Ukraine to fight a war, I mean, I would tell my partner, 100%. Um, I might trust her not to say anything to anyone else, but it doesn't always work that way. Uh, but yeah, I think the way things looking, and like if I had to make a guess that Russia would make a move in the next 2 to 3 weeks, possibly, based on how things are looking. You have to think maybe soldiers which might have been kept in the dark up until this point might now be starting to get told exactly what's going to happen in the coming days, weeks, and potentially months.
I think if you're a soldier in the Russian military at the moment, you would be naive not to think it's a possibility. I think that's the key thing, right? It's
Hmm.
there was at the beginning of all this, again in quotations, the beginning of all this, in this round, in the recent year, some may have been of the opinion that it is purely going to be for an exercise, and but as the convoys move, I think you would have to be naive not to consider that it may be more than that in that regards.
And I think a very telling sign is that despite the diplomatic talks that the US and Russia have had over the last week or so, we are seeing, of course, this evening the US telling its diplomatic staff in Ukraine to be prepared to leave on Monday. Obviously, we're recording this on Saturday evening, so it sort of 48 hours from now, we could potentially be seeing the entirety of the diplomatic staff that the US has in Ukraine either on their way out or at the very least packing their bags to leave.
To be fair, it did say it was their families. It didn't say that the staff, it wasn't direct staff at this time, was it not? Or did I misinterpret that? Just as a
I
pointer.
think it was
I was
just.
under the impression it was
Let me double
everyone.
check.
I've got that wrong.
I believe
Let me see
Germany
here.
definitely
And
have said
again,
families.
well, Germany said families, and then they denied it. Most recent reporting is that it was it was an actual correction. It started as a rumor a few days ago, and now it's actually that the State Department has ordered the families to begin evacuating as soon as Monday. So it's just
Yes.
families right now.
Right.
I know there were.
I mean, that can change quick, right? Like John's just said there, we're recording this on the Saturday. By Monday, it could be completely different. It may be family and and staff.
I mean, it takes
it's a
longer to
it's a
move
fluid.
families than to move staff members.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a fluid situation, right, in that regard. So doesn't matter what we're saying now. In 5 minutes, we could be still recording, and it could be something completely different again.
Yeah, and it's worth remembering that when the US began evacuating diplomatic families and staff from Afghanistan in August last year, things went from being just the families to being get everyone out in the space of 24, 48 hours. Obviously, that situation spiraled out of control very, very, very quickly for the US, and
That was rapid.
there's
That changed very
there's
quickly.
nothing really to say that the same won't happen now. I mean, Russia has 120,000 troops in place now around sort of the outskirts of Ukraine. Could we potentially see Russian troops marching into Ukraine Monday morning? Who knows?
Mm-hmm. In terms of the, I was gonna say, in terms of the,
Go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, in terms of the family, I think that's another. I mean, I've always, again, things are looking very, very likely to actually kind of, Russian incursion into Ukraine is looking very likely. But I was always kind of having this, I guess I call it hope, I suppose, that it was, it's been a bluff this whole time, and they're going to back down. Obviously, the negotiations falling through kind of reduced that hope a significant amount. Because with the negotiations falling through, then Russia can't really back down without looking weak, I guess. And now the evacuation of embassy personnel's families. I mean, that's not a small thing to suddenly have to do. I mean, I don't know how many embassy staff there are in Ukraine. I can't even figure a ballpark figure, but you have to assume there's probably going to be, maybe triple digits of people they're going to have to evacuate from the country in the new week. It's not a small thing to suddenly have to do, and it's not a cheap thing to do. And the fact that the US are doing it, I know the US have been very vocal about saying that they believe Russia could invade in a week or in 10 days or in 2 weeks, or they've been very vocal about that. But the fact that they've now gone from words to like action, which means like, they're not just saying this, they do genuinely believe that there is a risk, and pulling like families of like embassy personnel out, that is far more concerning to me than any kind of statement they've made.
It's interesting what you say about you can't back down and looking weak. And again, this is me just putting my other side of my hat on in that regards to just look at try and understand the full picture. Again, this is not, again, as I say, my area of knowledge, but he's currently successfully making NATO not look proactive and more reactive. To me, if I'm looking at it from an outsider point of view in that respect, is that not a success? And that's not weakness to be able to show, he doesn't have to do, he literally didn't have to do anything. They just moved equipment and it's done, it's had this reaction. It's not been proactive, it's been reactive. So if something was to actually happen, if he bluffed, if he called his bluff and made NATO respond like this or not respond like this in that case, if something was to happen in the future, he now knows how things will look.
Yeah, it's a good point. But I guess the counterpoint to that is, Ukraine is a non-NATO country, so the NATO aren't under any obligation to protect Ukraine.
No, that's fair.
If this build-up was on, again, just looking at a map, if it was on the Latvian or the Estonian border, and Germany was acting like this again, and other nations were quite sluggish to respond, to send arms to Latvia or Estonia or any other kind of, I believe they're the only two NATO countries actually with a border of Russia. Or not. I'm just looking.
Lithuania. You got Latvia.
Don't actually have a border. They don't have a border with
Estonia.
Russia. They have a border with Belarus. Which again, with the Russian troops in Belarus, that I guess, yeah, you can put Lithuania into that. And actually no, yeah, I forgot about Kaliningrad. Yeah, does have a border with Lithuania. Yeah, so any of the Baltic states really. And there was this divide in NATO countries. So then, yeah, I would absolutely say that this could be a win for Russia, just from the issues they've caused. But again, with Ukraine being a non-NATO state, and NATO having again no obligation to defend them, I guess it's. Yeah, it's very
your point's fair on the NATO. I guess that's something that I overlooked in that regard, and it's right. They're not obligated. Again, I'm just putting things out there. It's just thought pattern of, would if Putin decided to back down in quotations, would that be shown as a sign of weakness? I don't know. Again, it will come down to your political opinion, right? Because I guarantee you, people out there will. And we can all probably think of, again, allude to Twitter accounts who will say it was a great success because boots trembled in that regard. Yeah, no, it's just a thought. But no, I see your point around the NATO piece, so that makes sense in my head. So yeah.
Yeah, and in regards to the negotiations, the fact that where did they want NATO troops removed from? It was Romania and
Bulgaria.
Bulgaria, yeah, which again, completely ridiculous demand, because does that mean they want Romania and Bulgaria to remove their own troops from Romania or Bulgaria if they are NATO forces? And it was never going to be agreed upon. And again, that's another. If I had to say, like, the most concerning things again are now the evacuation of diplomats' families. And just the absolutely ridiculous demands that Russia are making, because Russia and Putin and the defense ministers, they're not stupid. They know these demands aren't going to be met. And the fact that they said before the negotiations started, they said that the demands they're putting forward, they're not like a menu you can pick and choose from. Like, you either reject them all or you accept them all. Like, they knew that they were going to be rejected. And it almost seems to me like they're kind of setting up for a domestic audience. Like, okay, well, look, we tried to negotiate with NATO. We made, in our eyes, very reasonable demands. They've, tore it up. They've got no intention of negotiating with us. They're trying to expand. They're trying to bring Ukraine in. They almost seems to be like they work it up towards justifying the like an actual military incursion into Ukraine. And as for like the Monday timeline, as they said, as soon as Monday for evacuating families, I believe, isn't it Monday that the US are planning to submit their written response to Russia on the demands?
It is supposed to be sometime next week. I don't know if it was Monday specifically, but they did say next week. They're written.
Yeah, I believe they said maybe. I think they said early next week, didn't they? So I'm taking that maybe of Monday, and the fact that they're going to pull diplomats families out ahead of this response probably tells us what the response is going to be, and it's not going to be one that Russia are going to like. So I think they pulling these families out in God, I can't speak this afternoon, in anticipation of Russia's response to the US's response.
Yeah, there's always the 900-pound gorilla sort of sitting in the side of the room, and that's the gas issue. That's, I mean, if we want to be honest, that's the main reason Germany is being so, what's the right word for it? Not belligerent, but
they're being cagey.
Cagey, non-committal.
But again, in that sense, right? They're thinking for number one, and number one in their mind is themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the other issue is that if because the nature of how the Russians have been regulating their gas output and their gas exports this year, Europe is already looking at the lowest gas reserves they've had at any point for this point in time in history. So they're low on their gas reserves or not low, but low for the time. And there is the threat if Russia cuts off gas supplies that they'll have to go to gas rationing. Again, natural gas heating is super popular there. Germany has moved over the past 10 years to cut off nuclear power, so they're very reliant on natural gas as a power generating method. So again, Germany is looking at this as if they have their gas supply shut off, they will have to deal with, massive amounts of gas rationing, potential blackouts, just severe damage to their, economy. And they sort of have to balance this with whether or not they're actually going to go to bat for Ukraine as a country. And if the difference is in their mind, basically, Ukraine will be overrun no matter what. And we don't want Russia to retaliate against us, so why would we help Ukraine? It's not that I agree with this. It's that, this is sort of their calculus that I believe they're trying to put together right now.
It's back to what I said earlier on with risk versus reward. And it's also about looking out for number one, and it's damned if you do and damned if you don't, ultimately.
Yeah.
For them. They can't do right or wrong, because the right or wrong, depending on your views, will be the right or the wrong.
And the dilemma they also face is that ultimately, even if they do stay out of it and appease Russia in that regard, there's nothing to say that further down the line Russia won't still turn around and cut off their supply of gas anyway. Because, at the end of the day, what we've seen in the last few months is that Russia will do and say what it has to do and say in order to suit its own needs and its own requirements. And it was, for a while, it was making all these stories about plans for big exercises, and that was why there was so many troops massing near Ukraine. And it's become obviously very apparent to everyone that that's not in fact the reason behind it all. We've now got the claims of the planned exercises in Belarus, and as Kyle said earlier, the equipment that has been moved into Belarus supposedly for this doesn't seem to make any sense because it's in all the wrong places.
And going back to Germany as well, like I fully understand, again, like David said, they're looking out for themselves. But in that case, they could just not provide weapons. The fact that they're actively blocking other countries from sending arms. I believe it was Estonia. They blocked Estonia from sending lethal aid to Ukraine. That's what I don't understand. I mean, again, okay, Germany look out for themselves. They're just going to stay out of it. Like, we're not going to provide arms. We'll provide, as they are providing a field hospital, I believe. And if they were like, okay, we'll provide a field hospital, we'll provide medical equipment, we'll provide, I don't know, I think like NATO will help them with like cybersecurity and stuff like that, against like cyber attacks. Fine. I'm not going to say I'll necessarily agree with it, but that would be absolutely acceptable, I believe. And I believe that would be acceptable to Ukraine as well. But the fact that they're going out of their way to block the transfer of arms from other European countries is what I don't understand. I mean, at that point, they go in from almost like a neutral party to almost like actively working against.
What did they block? What did they actually block? I wasn't not my area, so I don't know. So I'm going to ask the stupid questions. But what did they block?
I think it was.
I mean, it's not stupid because I'm not sure exactly. Yeah.
I think it was. I think it was It was
Just
some
gonna quickly Google
former
it.
Soviet-made howitzers, which over the course of the last 20, 30 years have gone from Soviet Union to Finland to Germany to Estonia. And then Estonia's turned around and sort of politely asked Germany, do you mind if we give these to Ukraine? And Germany's turned around and said no.
So they're saying no to offensive stuff rather than defensive.
Yeah, so I
Effectively,
found an article here from the Financial Times, which is this. So this was the last time I remember it happening. This was this was last month. So this was in December, when NATO, of all things, they vetoed Ukraine's purchase of anti-drone rifles, which again are completely non-lethal. And purely defensive. And I believe Germany did then back down on that and allowed the purchase of anti-drone rifles. But they then also vetoed anti-sniper systems. Um, I believe they said that was it was lethal aid, which I didn't understand at the time, but I believe it was the fact that these systems would help detect where a sniper had fired from, and I guess the implication was then you could find that sniper and kill them. So I think that was what Germany was unhappy with that. I'm trying to find what the most recent. Again, this is an article from December, so it's not going to be the most recent one.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand. Again, like
Yeah,
I
so
always
it's
keep going
D30
back to it.
howitzers.
Yeah. So
Yeah, Estonian D30 howitzers, which they're not a game changer. They are. I mean, how old? I mean, are they 60s D30, or is it a little bit later than that? Like weaponry. I'm just going to Google that.
yeah. So
It's yeah,
Germany will claim it's offensive rather than defensive. That will be their get out of jail in quotations
Mm.
free card. That's what they're hoping for there in that regard, isn't it?
but it's
We
worth
stopped
mentioning as
we stopped
well.
offensive stuff going in.
It's worth mentioning as
Yeah.
well, Kyle.
Oh.
You were saying about the military field hospital that Germany is
Mhm.
sending. That was actually agreed back in 2021.
Oh,
I've been
okay.
told the hospital was actually due to have been delivered last year, but for whatever reason there was some sort of delay to it, and the delivery has now only been sort of confirmed in the last couple of days. So it's not even like Germany is sending them any new sort of ability to deal with casualties in that regard. It's not like it's a new decision to send a field hospital. This is something that's actually been in planning for a while, and it's more that with the delays, possibly because of COVID-19 or whatever, now Ukraine has sort of said we really need this equipment you promised us, and Germany
Yeah.
is kind of actually getting its getting its boots on and getting that kit to them.
Yeah. No, that is interesting. I didn't know it was agreed last year, but again, I'm not surprised. Um, yeah. Again, it's the vetoing of other countries providing arms, which I can't get my head around. Again, if Germany doesn't want to provide arms, they don't have to provide arms. Like I said earlier, Ukraine's a non-NATO country. No one's obligated to help Ukraine. Um, but I mean, stopping, I mean, stopping countries, especially like Baltic states, which are, I mean, semi-threatened, but I mean, semi-regularly threatened by Russia themselves. I mean, like, I believe it was in the last few weeks or maybe the last couple of months there was quite a senior Russian politician which referred to um, the Baltic states as suburbs of St. Petersburg, which tells you everything you need to know about how like Russian officials view these countries. A lot of ex-Soviet states they don't view as independent entities. They view them as I guess almost how China views Taiwan as eventually they will be back to being Russian and Taiwan will eventually be back to being Chinese. They just view it as like a temporary independence, should we say? Um, so it's really frustrating that that Germany is blocking aid. Um, but I mean, I don't know what aid would actually help Ukraine in any kind of invasion. I mean, like howitzers are great. And anti-tank systems, fantastic. But like we discussed earlier, they're going to do they're going to slow Russia down. They're not going to stop an invasion, are they? Like what Ukraine needs are, I mean, like advanced air defense systems and I mean, again, I'm not an expert. I don't know what else we need, but for one, like air defense systems, I know they're being sent. I believe again, is it the Baltic states were just sending Stingers along with javelins?
I mean, I
And
don't want to be blunt, but I don't think there's a realistic way that you can give Ukraine enough aid so Ukraine alone can defeat Russia.
oh
I
no,
don't think that's possible at this point in time. Like maybe if you were to do like a 5 or 10 year plan, maybe there's a possibility that they'd be able to put up enough resistance to make a Russian invasion. Difficult enough to be practically impossible, but not at this point. No, there's nothing. There's just
I mean, if you just look at a map, I mean, at the moment, Ukraine are surrounded on, I mean, one, two, three, four, I mean, maybe five different fronts by Russian troops. I mean, I don't think there's a country on the planet that could withstand that. I mean, outside maybe the US, but I mean, even if the US were surrounded on five fronts by Russian troops who were poised to invade at any minute, you know, I think anyone's going to struggle against that. You know, it's and let alone a country which has been stuck in the middle of a civil war for the last 8 years. I mean, I mean, civil war slash Russian invasion for the last 8 years. Um, it's it's very difficult. And just to slightly touch on the war in the Donbass region as well. It's been really really quiet since the new year. There's a lot of focus on it. Yeah, there's a lot of focus on it in the build up to Christmas and the New Year. There was quite heavy fighting through November, through December, and then the New Year happened, and it's been fighting. Don't get me wrong, but not to the level at all as what it was. And even the Ukrainian MOD are reporting, 2-3 days at a time, like in a row, of just absolutely no ceasefire violations, which was completely unheard of prior to Christmas. And again, I thought a lot of it was maybe due because obviously the Russian Eastern Orthodox Christmas is a couple of weeks after, I guess, like the Western Catholic Protestant Christmas. I believe it's January 12th, maybe January 12th, or along those lines. So I was kind of thinking maybe it was kind of a lull in their holiday period, but it hasn't increased again. I mean, it's gone from the OSCE, who are monitoring a ceasefire in eastern Ukraine, to reporting 800 and 900, maybe over 1,000 ceasefire violations, which I should say they report every gunshot, every explosion, every burst of gunfire as one violation, whereas I think the Ukrainian MOD report every. I mean, I think if they get hit by 15 mortars and someone fires an RPG at them, they'll count that as one ceasefire violation, whereas the OSCE will report that as 16 or 17. So when I say they're reporting like 1,000 ceasefire violations, that just means that it's not necessarily it's not necessarily saying there's like very very heavy fighting, but just it's like prolonged, shall we say. But yeah, so like the OC, not only are now Ukraine, like I said, reporting like days and days of no ceasefire violations. I believe today was another one in which they said there was absolutely none. But the OSCE are now reporting maybe 100, 150, maybe 200 violations, which you can say it's almost like an 80% decrease in what it was before Christmas. The one thing, I guess, I think there's been 3 Ukrainian soldiers killed this year so far. Obviously all this month, it's still January. And I think last year, like January was I think there was quite a significant amount of Ukrainian soldiers killed in January last year. I know definitely they said between January and April, there was maybe 50 or 60 soldiers killed. And that was more than like the entire previous year put together. So the fighting in the east has decreased. And the reason for that, I mean, is much my guess as anyone else's. I mean, I'm personally of the belief that maybe the
Kind of
Ukrainian armed
understood.
forces are, well, yeah, there's that. Or I think Ukraine are just trying not to do anything that might provoke a large, like bout of fighting. So I think Ukrainian forces might be, in a way, letting certain things go, and not responding to them to kind of stop an escalation. Because again, this is something that Russia have talked about. They've said, like, any significant escalation, any significant kind of anything that looks like Ukraine are planning an offensive in the Donbass region would be a red line for them. So I think they're trying to almost take that excuse away from from Russia, sorry. So if and when Russia do invade, they've got no justification for it, in some respect. Um, Russia always say that Russian speakers are being oppressed in the East. I believe Putin recently, I think I've probably mentioned it on another podcast. He said it was close to a genocide of Russian speakers or Russian non-Russian nationals, like ethnic Russians, which of course is absolutely ridiculous. But yeah, the language that they use is obviously they're trying to say that Ukraine are being the aggressor in the East, and maybe they will use that as an excuse to kind of move in and protect ethnic Russians, which of course is, in the last couple of days the Russian Communist Party um, put forward the motion to recognize the separatist regions, the DNR and the LNR in Ukraine. So obviously, if Russia does recognize these regions and then they officially ask for Russian assistance, then I mean, what can you do at that point? Um, but yeah, I don't know what you guys think about the possible recognition of the breakaway states.
It, it,
Oh,
it's another political move ultimately to sell to the Russian people that Russia is doing the right thing, that it's not the aggressor. It's effectively trying to give them justification to protect what it will then view as sort of its own sovereign citizens. Um, Kind of similarly, I guess in the way that Argentina was very much of the opinion that it was defending the Falkland Islands from British aggressors, because it chose to recognise the Falklands as part of its territory. I suppose that's kind of what Russia's trying to do here. It's trying to recognise a part of Ukraine as Russian territory, and therefore the citizens as Russian citizens, in order to justify to its populace going in and fighting for it.
Hmm.
yeah, and again, something like that would. I mean, there are a couple of things that obviously it's a political move, by that party to A, get attention, and B, sort of change the calculus on how Russia would react to any potential Ukrainian offensives or actions against Russian separatists. It would sort of change it from, a more of a gray zone war to one where they're saying, we're protecting an official ally and Ukraine has acted against them. It's our job to, go out and protect them. But I mean, I think they're sort of already doing that. But I think that move specifically by that party was to force the Russians to, support the separatists more actively and more publicly. Um, but apart from that, again, Russian politics are a whole different can of. There's a lot of grandstanding. There's, again, it's effectively your strongman oligopoly. So it's Putin basically in charge, and he has to make certain people happy.
Hmm.
But most of the external action in Russia is mainly aimed at keeping his public approval up at this point.
Just needs to put a photo of him on a bear topless, and his public opinion goes up.
Yeah, I mean, I know people will always say polling in authoritarian regimes is flawed, but Putin does have a pretty high approval rating, even by independent pollsters, and even by independent polling agencies. He does continue to hold a high rating. And if you talk with Russians, I mean, talk to any Russian person and say, how does your family like Putin? And most of them will agree, yeah, most of my family members, approve of him and approve of what he does. Um, But and there also is the second reason that I would be remiss not to say of why Putin wants to act against Ukraine is that he does have a genuine um sort of a visceral fear of NATO. I mean, a lot of Putin's thinking comes from this, early mid 1990s place where, again, Putin was a cab driver and he views the fall of the Soviet Union as this, frankly, horrifying event that happened to Russia, one that he doesn't want to see repeated, and one that he views NATO as chiefly responsible for, and the US by extension. Um,
I mean, it's funny you say he's a
so
cab driver and not that he was a KGB agent as well. You'd think
Well, no, no,
that
it was this fall from being, this KGB agent under, the USSR to driving a cab. This is
Oh, right,
something
right,
that
right.
personally hurt him in a significant manner. So it's that, personal damage to him caused by the fall of the Soviet Union.
I mean,
Yeah.
the only one I can think of, maybe if we just quickly touch on the latest ISIS attack in Hasaka in northern Syria, which is, I believe, still ongoing, and obviously Woofers on Twitter is I think everyone's best bet for following to get a latest update on what's going on there. But obviously, ISIS have carried out quite a significant size attack against a prison holding, I believe it's around 5,000 ISIS prisoners in northern Syria. I believe the latest death totals, I think there's maybe 20 plus ISIS fighters killed, 7 or 8 Kurdish SDF fighters. I believe there's a couple of civilians killed as well. And as of tonight, the US have sent, was it Bradleys that Wolf was saying?
Yeah.
Bradley fighting vehicles into the city to help out the Kurdish security forces. So, I mean, this is quite a significant event. It's been going on now the last 3 nights. Again, I'm pretty guilty. I like to think that Syria is maybe my secondary focus, but I'm guilty of neglecting it recently because of Ukraine. But yeah, Woofers for sure is I think everyone's best bet for following latest developments on that as it happens.
Yeah,
I'd
and
agree.
I've been sort of seeing that happen in the background. I know Woofers is the person to follow on issues like that. Just, he is fairly on top of pretty much anything that happens in Syria. But yeah, it's definitely it's definitely concerning to see sort of a degradation in the security situation there, especially with ISIS.
No, for sure. I mean, and it's impressive that they've still got the manpower in northern Syria to pull off an attack like this. I mean, when it first happened, I thought it'd be over by the first night. The fact that we're now 3 nights in and they are, still fighting, still inflicting casualties is definitely concerning to say the least.
Yeah, and of course John is doesn't want to tell me, out loud to end this quickly, but yeah, sure.
Yeah, it's just something to keep an eye on. Just from my point of view, thanks again for having me. And I also just wanted to say as well, thanks to Adam and Nish, who also helped me on the account as well. As I mentioned earlier on, it is a team effort, and without them, it wouldn't be possible to cover what we cover. So thanks to those guys too.
Yeah, and everything is a team effort, isn't it? I don't know if I need to get an award as well, but we're obviously watching what's happening, and we'd like to thank everyone for sticking with us for this long and sort of listening to what we say.
Yeah, and with that, we will be back in around about 2 weeks' time for another episode of the podcast. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and we will see you then.